Well, welcome everyone. Today we are going to be providing a short and sweet overview of a project that is generously supported by the Herb Family Foundation. This is a proof of concept, a pilot program to incorporate measurements of soil health into the land appraisal process, specifically for Michigan. And so before we kick things off, I just want to remind folks, feel free to use the chat if you have any comments or questions throughout. You can also use the Q&A function that you might see on your kind of dashboard here. We will take plenty of time at the end of this presentation to answer questions. So feel free to either throw them in the chat or use the Q&A function, and we'll make sure that we'll do our best to get you to your questions. Today's overview will be short and sweet. We're shooting for 45 minutes. So let's kick this off. Our agenda today, our time together, we will do a brief round of introductions. We will provide some context and background as to how we got to this point, why this project exists. Then we will provide an overview of the Michigan Soil Health Appraisal Pilot Program. And then, of course, take plenty of time for questions and answers. So with that, I would like to hand the microphone off to Melissa Damashki. She is the president of the Herb Family Foundation. Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you, Lucas, and good morning. So I'm Melissa Damashki, president of the Fred A. and Barbara M. Herb Family Foundation. I'm delighted to welcome you to today's webinar with Delta Institute. Our foundation understands that to make Lake Erie swimmable, drinkable, and fishable, especially in the Western Basin where we see the toxic algal blooms, we need to support conservation practices that reduce excess phosphorus from agricultural runoff. And we also understand that there are many barriers that prevent this, including a lack of economic incentives to promote the adoption of conservation practices by farmers to improve their soil health. So we're proud, and we've been proud to partner with Delta Institute over the last 5 years to support efforts to create these economic incentives. Delta Institute's expertise, creativity, and approach to this work has been outstanding. I'm always eager to learn more from them. Lucas, today is no exception. I'm happy I could be part of this webinar and learn more from you and your team about the Soil Health Appraisal Program. Thanks for organizing this opportunity for us.
Thank you, Melissa. Just a brief bit about the Delta Institute. We are a nonprofit organization. This is our 25th anniversary this year. We, as a nonprofit, help Midwestern communities solve complex environmental problems. That ranges from brownfield redevelopment to improving stormwater management. But we also work a lot in the regenerative agriculture space for exactly the reasons that Melissa just mentioned. We have a focus on improving water quality in the Great Lakes watersheds, and we have really done a lot of work towards promoting the adoption of soil conservation practices to achieve that outcome. One of those mechanisms to promote those practices is trying to identify economic incentives. We want it to make sense on a farmer's budget to be able to adopt these practices. So before we dive into some context and background, I'll just briefly introduce myself. Again, my name is Lucas Chamberlain. I'm with the Delta Institute. I have a farming background. I also have a soil ecology research background. And I would like to introduce my two colleagues, Doug and Rob. Doug, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Lucas. And thanks to the Herb Institute or the Herb Foundation for taking this on and providing the support for the study. So I have basically been involved in the appraisal industry for 40 years at this point in time. I'm a certified general appraiser in Michigan, Indiana, Nebraska, Arizona, a bunch of different states where I do work. And I have had a extensive background in valuation, both stateside and globally through my positions with International Farming Corporation as well as Nuveen, and served as past president of the American Society of Farm Managers and Rural Appraisers. So we're taking a look at this program, and we'll get into a little bit more detail when we start talking about the the appraisal process itself. But much like Lucas and Rob, I have a farming background, been in agriculture, involved in agriculture in some fashion all of my life. And currently, we own and operate Stony Croft Farms, which is I guess what I could call an experimental farm most days, because we're experimenting with regenerative agriculture practices as well as organic practices, and we operate a organic flour mill with our products. I'll turn it back to you, Lucas.
Thanks, Doug, and I'll just turn it directly to Rob.
Well, thank you. I'm Rob Malcolmson, Certified Crop Advisor, and worked for 8 years with the Michigan Agriculture Environmental Assurance Program in Lapeer Conservation District, covering Lapeer and Macomb County. Also involved in developing the urban farming network in Flint, Michigan, and advising new and beginning farmers since the late 90s. Also operate a diverse organic farm here in Davison, where we produce pasture finished beef, pork, chicken, eggs, some produce lots of hay, some corn, soybeans, wheat, rye, barley, and we make layer and broiler feed and other feeds for animals from those things. So everything is directly sold to the public. And I'm just happy to be a part of this project.
Thank you, Rob. So this is the so-called project team. So as we go through this presentation, as you hear me refer to the project team, think me, Doug, Rob, and we're really, really grateful. We're very lucky to have this awesome team. So thank you, Doug and Rob. Let's get into some of the background on why we're here. So as we've mentioned, this project is generously supported by the Herb Family Foundation. As Melissa mentioned, we've been working together for 5 years at this point. We've done a lot of awesome work together. The focus, the geography, we have a geographic focus on this project and with our work with the Herb Family Foundation, and that's primarily in Southeast Michigan. So the 4 counties that you see here of Southeast Michigan: Washtenaw, Hillsdale, Lenawee, and Monroe. We work in these counties because they are situated over crucial watersheds of the Great Lakes region. So if we can promote conservation practices on farms there, then we can reduce nutrient pollution into those crucial waterways. Just a brief bit of background. All of this work operates under the assumption that soil health management systems, or soil conservation practices, these are things that we're all somewhat, for most folks, might be familiar with at this point. Things like cover crops, a reduced tillage regime, some kind of diverse crop rotation on farms. That the idea that implementing these practices have the ability to improve the condition and the health of agricultural soils in the right context. So the right practice in the right context may improve soil health. And when we look at Michigan, across the state, the levels of adoption of conservation practices, if we look at this map here as an example, looking at cover crops, we see that over the last 10 years, the adoption levels, rates rather, have increased. There are still certainly a long ways to go at scaling the adoption of these conservation practices. And the major barrier to that is cost. Farmers say in surveys that adopting these practices is cost prohibitive, and that greater economic incentives are needed to promote widespread adoption of these conservation practices and protect water quality. So when we look at the 4 counties that we really focus on in Southeast Michigan, when we look at levels of adoption of conservation practices, we see that they differ across counties. There are lots of reasons for that, but when we talk to producers in these counties, we see, again, it typically comes down to that adopting these practices is cost prohibitive, and that greater economic incentives are needed to promote these practices. So we took a step back and asked ourselves, okay, well, how do we incentivize adoption of soil conservation practices? And we formed an advisory group that was comprised of agricultural professionals, real estate professionals, soil conservationists, and what we saw far and away was that the greatest opportunity was to try to incorporate measurements of soil health into land valuation so that we incentivize adopting these practices to improve your soil health so that your land is worth more on the appraisal sheet. So before we dive into the program, I just wanted to highlight a few prerequisites that we've also identified with this advisory group. And the first being that there is a need for consensus among agricultural professionals that building soil health will increase net farm incomes. The second is that testing for soil health needs to be widely available and it needs to be affordable. And third is that for there to be a market for soil health in the agricultural real estate market, there needs to be some consensus that producers that are building their soil health are taking on some kind of cost. They're doing the work that that you would want to purchase on land. So it needs to be agreed upon that it takes time, or it needs to be understood that it takes time. There are potential yield deficits, not necessarily always, that there may be additional costs. And so again, the reason for this is that if it's not costly for a farmer to produce their healthier soil, then there's really no value in buying that land if it already has those characteristics. So these are kind of some of the assumptions that we're operating under here. Okay, let's get into the program itself. So at its highest level, this pilot program is a partnership between property owners and Delta Institute. So this comes in the form of an agreement between the property owners and Delta and the project team that these property owners agree to permit our project team to access their parcel to collect soil tests to gather some level of land management history and for us to perform an appraisal. In return, these producers or property owners receive the appraisal for free, as well as free access to their soil health results, as well as recommendations for how to improve their soil health. So we see this as a win-win agreement here. And the way that our project team has delineated different roles of this pilot program. Delta, we administrate the program itself, facilitate the agreements, provide support to our partners, and then ultimately we will synthesize and put together all the results, see what worked, see what didn't work, and then continue to refine this approach. Our appraisal partners or appraisal expert Doug has been assisting with participant outreach, doing a lot of market research and analysis, and of course in charge of the appraisals themselves, making sure that this makes sense with appraisal methodology. And then Rob, as our soil health consultant, soil expert, has also been doing a ton of outreach, has helped create the methodology for the soil testing, done the soil testing itself, as well as being in charge of the pipeline of collecting the soils, sending them for measurements, and also analyzing those results as well. What we wanted to do was find parcels that have some kind of similarities so that they can be compared, not only for their soil test results, but also for their real estate properties, characteristics rather. So we wanted similar size parcels, similar slope or similar topographic characteristics. And we also wanted them within a similar geographic range. And so with that, to speak to the geography of this program so far, I'll hand it off to Rob.
All right, well, we took a look at the various counties and the watersheds and the soil types, and we settled on really focusing on Lenawee County. I think there was one sample taken in eastern Hillsdale the other day, but Lenawee really has a good representation of the types of soils that we're looking at, principally loams that were gently rolling. We ran into quite a few different kinds the other day, but the watersheds there are headed for Lake Erie primarily, and it was very helpful to be able to find a contact at the Lenawee Conservation District that put us in touch with some really top-notch farms that were doing a lot of things very well, so that we could establish a benchmark of quality work there. So we ended up choosing 4 benchmark farms that will get us some type of idea of what these soil health measurements will look like from that type of management. And then we selected an additional 3 farms from the real estate market that have recently sold. We chose them at random. There were a variety of practices going on at those sites. And then we picked one CRP site that looked like it had been idle for probably 15 years. There was some small brush on it and typical native perennial polyculture there.
Doug, would you like to tackle this slide?
Sure. Basically, what to kind of add on to what Rob has said is that when we looked at the 4 counties that were proposed for the study, Hillsdale, Lenawee, Washtenaw, and Monroe, when we look at the agriculture in those 4 counties, Washtenaw has got a lot of urban influence due to Ann Arbor being there. So we wanted to take some of that, I guess, urban influence out of the equation if we could. So then we were left with, Monroe, Lenawee, and Washington, or Hillsdale County. And from a topographical characteristic standpoint, Lenawee County is very, I guess, I don't want to say consistent, but very similar throughout its geographic area in soil types as well as topography. And the other very, I guess, strong influence on my decision to focus on Lenawee County was just the extent of information and sales data that's available for analysis within the county. In doing the initial research, I came up with over 140 sales that have occurred over the last 2 to 3 years in Lenawee County. So that gives us a good database to work from. I've been able to do a little bit of analysis at this point in time on the influence of market conditions or time over the last 3 years, as well as NCCPI ratings for each of the comps, and trying to determine, what are the major influences on value, and doing some statistical analysis. I'm probably going to get a little too technical for just our brief summary here today, but working on trying to figure out what has the greatest correlation and influence on value by looking at the R-squared values on each of the characteristics, and finding out, size doesn't have a lot of difference, but what is having some difference is obviously the productivity or the NCCPI rating. So we're going to be looking at more characteristics as we go forward in the analysis and the appraisal process. But what we're really trying to figure out is how can we monetize the soil health characteristics so a farmer can add that, as Lucas mentioned, to their balance sheet. And, if the balance sheet doesn't reflect soil health and additional value as a result of soil health, farmers are going to be less incentivized, I believe, to actually participate in these types of programs. So we're working with collecting the data, and then we'll take some of the most relevant data, and we're focusing primarily on that area south and southwest of the city of Adrian. There's a number of sales in there that are very close to our cooperator locations, so we'll be focusing primarily on those sales, getting some land management history. If we can get the participants to the land buyer and seller to participate in a brief questionnaire on, what their management practices were. As Rob mentioned, we did some soil samples the other day on several of the comparable sales, and we'll take a look at those, and once we get the results back from that. So we're going to collect that cash rental data for the subject farms, the comp sales, see what we can come up with on that, and then just determine what impact these soil ratings may have on income levels, as well as ultimate property values through the appraisal process. So, we're benchmarking it, basically sampling those soils and taking a look at the sales, and we'll do the analysis on the sales. And, again, seeing if we can't come up with a way to monetize the soil health characteristics and farming practices in the appraisal process.
Thank you, Doug. And I just wanted to provide a visual of some of or part of our data collection process. Doug had mentioned that we wanted to collect land management history using a brief questionnaire, and this is something that we've mocked up for that purpose. So as you can see, we're trying to make things, this would be a front and back questionnaire, trying to make things as easy as possible for that process. And this is just an example of some of that data collection, one of our tools. And why don't I'll hand it back to Rob so Rob can describe our sampling methodology.
All right, well, the sampling was typical of any nutrient test. We used a soil probe and took it about 6 to 7 inches deep. One of the benchmark farms, it was beginning to dry out, and I put all my weight on it and it wouldn't go in the ground very far. Did our best with that, and then took about 12 cores, mixed it in a bucket, and took a subsample and bagged that and sent it to the lab. We wanted to sample the benchmark farms and the sales sites at the same time, on the same weather and so forth, so that as much stuff was comparable as possible. And we focused on primarily row crop and field crop types of situations rather than hay and pasture, just so we could have some more validity to the comparison between the two groups of properties. And let's see if there's anything else.
And this I included, thank you for that description, Rob.
Yep.
This is just an example of, Rob mentioned that we take these samples, soil samples, so that we can compare their soil health scores across different parcels. And this graphic that you see on the right side of your screen is an example of how soil health can be compared across different geographies. And this comes to us from the Soil Health Institute. There are partners in this work in a different geography. We're also doing this work, piloting this in Illinois, in parallel to our work in Michigan. And so this is kind of just a visual example of how different indicators of soil health can be compared across different geographies, assuming that those properties share some kind of similarities of their soil characteristics. And then on the left-hand side of the screen, I've included a visual representation of where this measurement takes place in the appraisal process. So this is just a flow chart of a typical, very, very simplified process of appraisal. And you can see in the red box is where this collection of soil health indicators takes place to create some kind of index of soil health to be factored in at a later date or a later time. So just to provide a brief overview timeline of this project, we have, thanks again to really valuable partnerships in Lenawee, the conservation district there, we have had we've had successful recruitment of our farmer cohort, and we're working with them currently to collect the soil health data and the land management history. So steps 1 and 2 are occurring right now. Our next step will be to complete the appraisals using this kind of proof of concept that we've come up with, and to provide the results of those soil tests once they come back from Midwest laboratories, as well as providing improvement recommendations to those operators. So that'll occur in the summer. And then looking ahead to the fall is when we look back and see what worked, what didn't work. We refine our approach, and we see if there is a possibility to try this in different areas of Michigan to scale it to this broader scaling. And we also, if possible, want to come up with a training curriculum, if possible, to try to institutionalize this proof of concept, if that is indeed the next step forward. So just to put a pin in it, some expected outcomes here is we want to further our understanding of the relationship, if any, between soil health and the value of farmland in Michigan, especially considering kind of market characteristics there. We also, again, this is a proof of concept that we're developing. So this is, we are developing it, and we are piloting it to see what works, see what doesn't work, and see what could be applied to different regions. And finally, we want to increase awareness and promote the adoption of soil conservation practices among Michigan farmers. And so, looks like we have about 15 minutes. So why not, I'll stop sharing my screen and we can take any questions from the audience. Feel free to use the chat function or the Q&A function. We have plenty of time for questions.
I did have one question, Lucas,
Yeah.
from a participant regarding the sales data and the availability of that. And I answered them on chat, but I just let everybody know that, you know, I've got it all on a spreadsheet at this point in time. Right now, I've divided it by time and size, as well as township locations and improved versus vacant. So we're only going to be dealing with vacant land sales because we don't want any influence from building values to, I guess, I don't want to say distort, but have an influence on the price per acre. So I've taken out the improved sales out of that at this point.
Thank you, Doug. Well, while we're waiting for any questions, oh, great. Trilby asks, how do you estimate increased agricultural output based on soil health? Do we have any benchmarks?
That's a good question. It may be more of a Rob question than an appraisal question in terms of trying to determine the influence on soil health on, if I read the question correctly, the influence of soil health on income and productivity. And I think that, you know, Rob, you've probably got a little better handle on how soil health does impact profitability and productivity.
Well, there's a wide variety of studies out there, and our purpose for this pilot project really isn't to delve into that too closely, but more establish a comparison between some top managed farms and some random properties that have recently sold. I do know personally from just reading and experimenting that with weather challenges, healthy soil can outproduce less healthy soil in terms of crop yield. And some studies indicate that after a transition period that farms that have implemented healthy soil practices are more profitable. And it's always variable, of course. There's a lot of factors there. But there is information out there in the literature if you want to know more about that.
And carrying on, Trilby asked a further question, had a comment, increased property values based on increased sales. And I would agree with that, Trilby, in that, when we talk about increased sales, I think we were talking probably profitability of a particular operation, yields and things like that as a result of increased soil health. So, that's one of the things that we're going to try and measure is, what do market participants look at? Are they looking at soil health characteristics? Is this going to have a resulting impact on the value? And if it has an impact on the value, then obviously it falls to the balance sheet of the farmer and will have an impact on value. But, controlling for other variables also, like you said, does have a significant impact on. That's one reason we tried to stay out of Washtenaw County as much as possible and focus on Lenawee County. And that will be one of those factors. Will be just kind of an aside a little bit, but my youngest son is a economist, econometrician, and with a PhD in ag econ, and we're going to be pulling him in on some of this controlling variables and taking a look at this on a more of a multivariate regression analysis so that we can control for those other types of variables other than just soil health characteristics and NCCPI ratings, et cetera. So, and then Megan, you had a question on how to expect this additional valuation to compete with developmental pressures. And again, that, Rob and I were talking about that the other day when we were out looking and getting our soil samples. And, that is just something that I'm not sure how you can compete with that other than through some form of conservation easement type of applications, or I guess rewarding farmers in some fashion. And I'm not sure how that's done when they're dealing with development. And you can't blame a farmer if he can sell it for, I'm just going to throw some numbers out here. If he can sell it for $5K an acre for farming purposes, and he can sell it for $10,000 an acre for development, you can't blame him for selling for development because that's his retirement plan. But when we look at legacy operations, things like that, how can we maintain that legacy in agriculture in these good agricultural areas? One of the things that we're seeing a lot of activity in right now is in alternative energy with solar and wind energy having an impact. And so it makes sense for solar to be placed on some of the poorer quality land, but we're seeing a lot of solar farms being put on some pretty darn good farmland. So again, those are factors that go beyond the scope of this particular academic study, but I think they're important questions as well. So and then I don't want to hog the comment section here, but auction versus market level pricing, we're seeing more and more auctions taking place is kind of the, I guess, I don't want to say preferred, but it is becoming a much more common approach to marketing of farmland. And, there is some influence from an auction, but we haven't been able to really characterize that. And that may be one of those factors that we can take a look at when we look at our multivariate regression analysis. Was this sold on an auction, or was it sold, private treaty type of thing? So, and again, Megan, seems like a great opportunity for land trust to get involved. And so, having done a number of appraisals for conservation easements in the past, yeah, it can have a significant influence. I think there was a recent court case on conservation easements and the perpetuity of conservation easements that was reversed a lot of the thinking on the perpetual easement type of thought process, but more remains to be seen. That just came out, I think, in the last month or two. So and then staying out of Washtenaw, primarily Trilby, because of number one, the urban influence. We want to focus primarily on agriculture at this point in time.
Thank you for all of those answers, Doug. I really appreciate that. Just seeing some comments here in the Q&A. I will make sure that that's a question that they want answered first. While I'm addressing that, I was curious, Doug, you had mentioned thinking towards the end of this pilot program when we're thinking about next steps. You've talked a lot about how this might impact taxes or I wonder if you'd like to speak more to kind of your thoughts looking ahead to other things we should maybe be considering in terms of taxes.
That's been an issue that I have been very interested in over my entire career. Is some jurisdictions in the United States tax farmland based on its productive capabilities, and Michigan does not do that. And so I'm thinking that as we go forward, that this may be an opportunity for us to take a look at the entire property tax issue surrounding farmland, and that farmland is just not farmland. There's varying degrees of quality of farmland, productivity of farmland, and things. And so I'm hopeful that we may be able to eventually turn this into an opportunity to take a look at how farmland is taxed in the state of Michigan. So in Trilby, I understand 180,000 acres of farmland in Washtenaw County, and I can certainly appreciate that. Lenawee is about almost double that in terms of its acreage of farmland. And again, just wanting to take that factor out of the valuation process of the urban influence is pretty much why we stuck with Lenawee.
Well, we have time. We have 5 minutes left. If anyone has any final questions, happy to address those here. Lee says, I have land in both Ohio and Michigan. Is the system in Ohio a good model? Doug, maybe you can speak to that.
Yeah, I am aware of it's been a while since I worked in Ohio, Lee, but they are more productivity and soil quality based in their tax process in Ohio than they are in Michigan. I think it's called a CAUV, which is your agricultural use valuation on their property taxes. And I think that is a more equitable means of taxing than what we have here in Michigan. Michigan, it seems like you're basically looking at, what's the price per acre, and we're going to equalize it. And, it doesn't matter whether you've got good soil, bad soil, whatever. It's on a per acre basis for the most part. So, but yeah, the CAUV system in Ohio, I think is slightly more equitable.
Megan asks, have you been engaging the new MDARD soil unit? They're working through how to evaluate and incentivize soil health.
Great question. And I would have to say myself at this point, I wasn't aware of it. So, need to look into that. I don't know if Rob was aware of anything like that.
I have not heard of it.
So any information you've got, Megan, that you can share with us, please do.
The Herb Family Foundation is helping support Michigan Environmental Council, Michigan Agribusiness Association, National Wildlife Federation, I think Michigan Agricultural Advance, a number of organizations that are part of that. So I'd be happy to connect you after the webinar, Lucas and Rob and Doug.
Wonderful. Thank you, Melissa. And jumping on that as well, Megan says that the Michigan Climate Smart Farms Project would love to stay in touch too. So absolutely, we'll be sure to connect all of us here. And I think, oh, go
Jordan,
ahead.
Jordan also has a question, and Jordan will work on that. And I don't have an answer for it right now, but that is certainly something we'll take a look at. And I see you often enough that we can have a ongoing dialogue outside of the this process too.
And for anyone curious, Jordan was asking, how do we plan to adjust our modeling or our regression analysis to tackle areas with stronger irrigation or muck soil prevalence? So that will certainly be it's something we'll get to. But I think it's important that Jordan also brought up the NCCPI, which I realize I don't think we use that acronym, but maybe didn't say what it meant. That's the National Commodity Crop Productivity Index, and that's used often in Michigan to give some kind of indication for the suitability of soils for certain commodity crops.
I would just add to that, Lucas, that if a soil type doesn't have a large enough presence, many times the NCCPI is affected by that as well. We saw some of our more productive soils in Lenawee County when I was looking at the NCCPI rating on them being very low. And so that's an indicator, but it certainly is not the be all to end all for productivity.
Well said. Great. Well, we have reached the end of our time here together, everyone. So we want to say thank you so much for joining us. This recording will be uploaded. You will receive the slides from today's presentation. And please do not hesitate to reach out with any questions, comments, concerns. And with that, we can wrap for today. Go ahead, Doug.
I just have one quick question. Can we get a list of the participants, and so that we can stay in touch with anybody that's got a particular question?
Yes, absolutely.
All right, great.
Wonderful. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day, and you will hear from us soon.